I needed a break. Work had been overwhelming. My personal life felt stagnant, and I wanted a weekend of solitude to clear my head. I found a listing on Airbnb that seemed perfect. A cozy, secluded cabin deep in the woods, far from any distractions. The host, an older woman named Helen, had excellent reviews. Guests praised her hospitality, describing her as warm and kind. The pictures showed a rustic stone cabin with a wooden porch, nestled among towering pines. It looked like the perfect escape. I booked it immediately. The drive there was long but scenic. I left early in the afternoon, following winding roads that eventually turned into gravel. The deeper I went into the forest, the fewer signs of civilization I saw. No gas stations, no houses, just trees pressing in on both sides. My GPS lost service miles before I reached the cabin, but I had written down the directions just in case. By the time I arrived, the sun was beginning to set. The cabin looked even more beautiful in person, the golden light casting long shadows over the ivy-covered stone walls. A porch swing swayed gently in the breeze. It was quiet, the only sound the occasional rustle of leaves. I got out of the car, stretching my legs as I took it all in. The key code Helen had provided worked, and the door creaked open to reveal a warm, inviting interior. Wooden walls, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with books and old knickknacks. It smelled faintly of pine and something sweet, like cinnamon. A note on the kitchen counter caught my eye. "Welcome. I hope you enjoy your stay. I wish I could meet you, but I had to leave town unexpectedly. Feel free to make yourself at home." Helen. I set my bags down and explored the space. The bedroom was small but cozy, with a heavy quilt on the bed. The bathroom was clean, the kitchen stocked with basics. Everything felt warm and lived in, like a place that had been cared for over the years. That first night was peaceful. I made tea, curled up by the fireplace with a book, and let the silence settle around me. There was no traffic, no city noise, just the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustling of branches outside. I slept deeply, wrapped in the comfort of my isolation. But the second night, something felt different. I was in bed, teetering on the edge of sleep, when I heard a soft creak. It wasn't the wind or the normal sounds of an old house settling. It was deliberate, a slow pressure on the floorboards. My pulse quickened, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a raccoon outside or a tree branch shifting against the house. Then I heard it again, closer this time. I held my breath, straining to listen. The cabin was old, and old buildings made noise. But this was different. The sound had a weight to it, like footsteps, careful and deliberate. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping the beam around the room. Nothing. The rest of the night was restless. I kept hearing faint noises, a shuffle, a creak, a whisper of movement. Every time I turned on the flashlight, I saw nothing. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. By morning, my nerves were frayed. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my imagination was getting the best of me. But the feeling lingered, an instinctual sense of being watched. I decided to cut my trip short. I packed my bags, ready to leave, but before I walked out, something caught my eye. The basement door. It was slightly ajar. I hadn't noticed it before. Had it been open the whole time? My first instinct was to ignore it, to get in my car and go. But something about it nagged at me. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled the door open. A damp, musty smell wafted up, mixed with something metallic. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, my phone flashlight casting long shadows on the stone walls. The basement was cluttered with old furniture and boxes, but what made my stomach drop was the bed in the corner. It wasn't just any bed. It was neatly made with a nightstand beside it, a hairbrush, pair of glasses, a book left open, as if someone had just been reading it. Someone had been living down here. Before I could process it, I heard the basement door above me creak shut. Panic surged through me. I turned and bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding. As I reached the top, I saw Helen standing there, her face blank, her eyes unreadable. I didn't stop. I slammed into her, pushing past with everything I had. She stumbled, but I didn't look back. I sprinted for the front door, my hands fumbling with the lock. Behind me, I heard her footsteps, heavy and fast. I tore the door open and ran to my car. My hands shook as I tried to get the keys in the ignition. I saw her in the doorway, standing still, watching. Her expression was calm. Too calm. The engine roared to life, and I sped down the gravel driveway, my breath coming in gasps. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town. I parked in front of a police station, my entire body trembling as I forced myself to breathe. When I told them what had happened, they took it seriously. I gave them the Airbnb listing, my reservation, everything. They sent officers to the cabin. What they found made my blood run cold. Helen wasn't just an Airbnb host. She had been luring guests for years. The basement wasn't just a hiding place, it was a prison. They found evidence linking her to several missing persons cases, personal belongings from people who had never checked out. The bed wasn't for storage. It was where she kept her victims. I was lucky. I got out. For weeks, I couldn't shake the image of her standing in the doorway, watching as I fled. The eerie calm in her expression, the quiet determination in her eyes. I don't use Airbnb anymore. Be careful where you stay. You never really know who's on the other side of the listing. The Airbnb seemed perfect when we first arrived. It was a small studio rental in a rougher part of the city, but the photos made it look cozy. My boyfriend and I wanted a quick getaway, just a weekend of relaxing, eating junk food, and catching up on movies. The place wasn't anything fancy, but it had what we needed. A bed, a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a living space. The front of the house had 2 smaller windows on either side of the front door and a bigger one to the right, which had a motion sensor light outside. One of the smaller front windows didn't fully close because there was an outdoor security camera wire running through it, but we didn't think too much about it at the time. That first night was normal. We ordered food, put on Netflix, and snacked in bed. I got tired before my boyfriend, which wasn't unusual. He liked to stay up late playing his PlayStation, so I curled up with our dog and drifted off around 1 a.m. while he stayed on the couch, gaming. At some point in the night, he started feeling off. He couldn't explain it, but he had this gut feeling that something wasn't right. He said the feeling got so strong that he decided to stay awake. Then, at 3 a.m., the doorbell rang, loud and sharp. I shot awake, my heart racing as I tried to process what was happening. My boyfriend paused his game, staring at the door. Before either of us could react, a loud banging followed the ring. Then came the screaming. A woman's voice, shrill and desperate. "Help me! Please! Let me in! Help!" The banging didn't stop. It was frantic, like she was using both fists and throwing her whole body against the door. The only thing securing it was a single deadbolt. My stomach dropped at how flimsy that felt now. I looked at my boyfriend, panicked. He grabbed me and our dog, pulling us toward a blind spot near the bed where we wouldn't be visible from the windows. I handed him my pocket knife, even though we both knew that wouldn't do much if she got in. We waited. The pounding and screaming went on for what felt like forever. My heart was racing so fast I could barely breathe. My boyfriend kept his arms around me, his whole body tense as we sat in silence, waiting for it to stop. Our dog was shaking in my lap. Then, all at once, silence. We stayed frozen, listening. Nothing. No more banging, no more yelling. Just the sound of our own heavy breathing in the dark. We sat like that for several minutes, trying to decide if she had left. My boyfriend whispered that maybe she moved on to another house. Maybe she was gone. We crept back onto the couch, still on edge but trying to calm down. He kept saying that we had done the right thing by not opening the door. That in this area we couldn't trust anyone, especially not someone acting so erratic in the middle of the night. We were starting to breathe a little easier when it happened again. "Help me! Let me in! I need help!" The pounding came back, harder this time. My blood turned to ice. My boyfriend grabbed my arm and pulled me down behind the couch. This time we saw her. Through the gap in the window where the security camera cord ran through, we saw her face. She had climbed up onto the porch railing and was leaning close, peering inside. Her hair was tangled, her eyes wide and frantic. She was scanning the room, and then she tried to open the window. I felt my entire body lock up as I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone to my ear. I tried to explain through panicked breaths that there was a woman trying to break into our Airbnb, that we were terrified, that we didn't know what to do. The operator's response made my stomach drop. He said since she wasn't inside and we weren't in immediate danger, he couldn't send anyone right away. They would have an officer drive through the area when they could. Then he told us to sit tight and not let her in. That was it. That was all he had to say. I felt sick. My boyfriend was furious. We had no way of knowing if she was alone, if she was armed, or what her intentions were. We only knew that she was still there. My boyfriend grabbed his phone and called his friend, explaining the situation and asking if he could drive by to scare her off so we could leave. His friend agreed and said he'd head over as fast as he could. While we waited, the motion sensor light outside kept flicking on and off. She was still there, pacing back and forth, sometimes stepping onto the porch, sometimes moving to the side of the house. Each time she moved, the light would flash on, illuminating her for a brief second before going dark again. She never stopped moving. Then, around 5 a.m., we saw flashing red and blue lights outside. A cop car had finally arrived. From the bathroom window, we could see her talking to the officer. We couldn't hear anything, but we watched as they spoke for a couple of minutes. Then, without ever coming to talk to us, the officer got back into his car and drove away. She was still there. Whatever she had said to him, it had worked. She wasn't leaving. We watched, horrified, as she paced again, back and forth, back and forth. It was like she was contemplating something, deciding her next move. The motion light flicked on and off, on and off. We were exhausted, terrified, and out of options. Then, at 5:30, my boyfriend's friend finally arrived. We had already packed everything. The second she moved toward the side of the house, we bolted. I grabbed our dog, my boyfriend grabbed our bags, and we sprinted to the car. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. I didn't dare look back. We sped off, not stopping until we were miles away. Only then did we finally take a breath. We left a review about our experience, warning others. We never found out who she was or what she wanted. We never found out if she was actually in danger or if she was trying to lure us out. All we knew was that something felt deeply wrong about that night. I still have nightmares about it. The sound of her screaming, the way she looked at us through that window, the way the motion light kept turning on and off, on and off. Always trust your gut. It might just save your life. The weekend was supposed to be perfect. My boyfriend, Jake, and I had been looking forward to a quiet getaway for months. Between our stressful jobs and the chaos of everyday life, we desperately needed time to unwind. We found a beautiful Airbnb in Florida. Secluded, cozy, and highly rated. The photos showcased a charming one-bedroom home with rustic wooden interiors, a spacious kitchen, and a private backyard with a fire pit. It seemed ideal. The host, David, had stellar reviews. Every guest praised the house's cleanliness and how David was responsive but never intrusive. That was exactly what we wanted: privacy, relaxation, and no stress. We arrived on a Friday evening. The moment we pulled up to the house, I felt a slight unease that I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the silence. The house sat on the edge of a wooded area with no immediate neighbors. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. Jake, always the practical one, brushed off my concerns. "It's supposed to be quiet," he said, unloading our bags from the car. "That's the whole point of getting away." Inside, the house was exactly as described: warm, inviting, and spotless. The wooden floors creaked gently under our feet as we explored. The bedroom had a large bed with crisp white sheets, and the bathroom was stocked with fresh towels. The living room had a cozy leather couch facing a television and a bookshelf filled with classic novels. Everything seemed perfect. We spent our first night cooking dinner and enjoying a glass of wine by the fire pit. The air was cool, and the only sounds were the occasional chirping of crickets. It felt like the peaceful escape we had hoped for. But something changed on the second night. It started with a feeling, a nagging sense that something was off. Jake and I had just finished dinner and were lounging in the living room. He was flipping through channels on the TV while I absent-mindedly browsed my phone. I glanced around the room, taking in the decor. That's when I noticed it. A tiny red blinking light from the bookshelf. My stomach clenched. "Hey!" I said, nudging Jake. "Do you see that?" He followed my gaze. "See what?" I pointed at the blinking light. He frowned, got up, and walked over to the shelf. "Probably just a router or something, but routers don't blink like that." He leaned in closer and went silent. A moment later, he turned to me, his face pale. "It's a camera." I felt my breath hitch. "Are you serious?" Jake reached out and plucked the small device from the shelf. It was discreet, tiny, black, and easily missed among the books. But it was definitely a camera. My heart started pounding. "What the hell?" Jake didn't answer. He was already moving, searching the house. I followed, my hands shaking. We checked the bedroom, the kitchen, even the bathroom. And then we found another one, tucked inside a vent above the bed. I felt sick. We weren't alone. Someone had been watching us. That realization sent me into full panic mode. Every inch of the house felt tainted. Every shower I had taken, every private moment, it had all been recorded. Jake was furious. He grabbed his phone and called the police. As he explained the situation, I could hear the tension in his voice. Meanwhile, I searched online for hidden camera detection tips. My worst fear was confirmed when I turned off the lights and used my phone's flashlight to scan the room. Tiny reflections glowed back at me. From the smoke detector, the bedside lamp, even inside the living room TV. There were at least 6 cameras. The police arrived within 30 minutes. The officers were calm, but I could tell they were disturbed by what they found. They took statements and collected the cameras for evidence. One of the officers pulled us aside. "You did the right thing by calling us. We've seen cases like this before, and sometimes it's worse than just recording." My skin crawled. "What do you mean, worse?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Some people sell footage online." I felt like I was going to be sick. That night, we left the house and checked into a hotel. I barely slept, haunted by the thought of someone watching me, capturing intimate moments without my consent. The violation was overwhelming. The next morning, we contacted AIRBNB. They assured us they were investigating, but their initial response was disappointing. They only offered a refund and a voucher for a future stay. I was furious. It wasn't until we threatened legal action that they took things more seriously. The listing was removed, and eventually we found out that David, the host, had a history of renting properties under different names and installing hidden cameras. Police traced the cameras back to a remote server filled with years of footage from unsuspecting guests. We later learned that we weren't the only victims. Several guests before us had reported feeling watched but never found evidence. I still don't know how much footage of us exists or where it ended up. That trip changed the way I view AIRBNBs forever. Now, every time I check into a rental, I inspect every inch of the place, scanning for hidden cameras, covering vents, and unplugging devices. The fear never fully goes away. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: always trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Traveling solo was something I had always wanted to do. The idea of immersing myself in a foreign country, experiencing new cultures, and discovering hidden places felt exhilarating. So, when I finally saved enough money and cleared my schedule for a few weeks, I booked a trip to Italy. I planned to visit Rome, Florence, and Venice. But before those bustling cities, I wanted to experience the smaller, quieter parts of the country. That's how I ended up booking an Airbnb in a picturesque town just outside of Florence. The listing was for a private room in an old Italian villa, run by a man named Marco. His reviews were mostly positive, with guests praising his hospitality and the beauty of the home. A few comments mentioned that he was a little too friendly, but no one seemed genuinely alarmed, so I ignored it. When I arrived, the villa was even more beautiful than the pictures had suggested. It was an old, stone-built house with ivy climbing up the walls and a garden filled with vibrant flowers. Marco greeted me at the door. He was in his late 50s, balding, with a slightly crooked smile. His English was decent, and he welcomed me with an enthusiasm that felt both warm and slightly overbearing. "You are very beautiful," he said almost immediately after I stepped inside. "Welcome, welcome. You will love it here." I smiled politely and thanked him, assuming he was just being friendly. He led me up an old wooden staircase to my room, which was cozy and filled with antique furniture. The window overlooked a vast field of olive trees, and for a moment, I felt completely at peace. "Make yourself at home," Marco said, standing in the doorway. I noticed he hadn't left yet. "If you need anything at all, you just tell me." His eyes lingered on me for a little too long. I nodded, trying not to overthink it, and he finally left, closing the door behind him. That night, after a long day of exploring the town, I returned to the villa and found Marco waiting for me in the dimly lit hallway. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting him to be there. "How was your day?" he asked, smiling. "It was great," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "The town is beautiful." He stepped a little closer. "I can show you the best parts tomorrow if you like." I hesitated. "Oh, that's nice of you, but I have plans to explore on my own." His smile faltered for just a second before returning. Of course. You enjoy your evening." I quickly went to my room and locked the door. Something about his presence unsettled me. I told myself it was just my imagination. He was probably just a friendly host who wanted to make sure I was enjoying my stay. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me too closely. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Marco. "Marco, good night. Hope you sleep well. I am just downstairs if you need me." I stared at the message. It wasn't exactly inappropriate, but it felt off. I didn't respond and placed my phone on silent. At around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. At first, I wasn't sure what had startled me. Then, I heard it, the sound of my doorknob slowly turning. My body went rigid. Someone was trying to open my door. I held my breath, my heart pounding so loudly I thought whoever was outside would hear it. The knob jiggled a little more forcefully this time. Then I heard a quiet, shuffling sound, followed by a key sliding into the lock. Panic surged through me. Marco had a key to my room. I bolted upright and did the only thing I could think of. I screamed, loudly, The sound of footsteps rushing away filled the silence. I sat there, trembling, barely able to process what had just happened. I waited, listening, but everything was quiet again. For the rest of the night, I sat awake in bed, my back pressed against the headboard, gripping my phone with shaking hands. At sunrise, I packed my bags as fast as I could. I didn't care about getting a refund, I just wanted out. As I crept downstairs, Marco appeared in the kitchen, smiling as if nothing had happened. "You are up early," he said, pouring coffee. I forced a smile, trying to hide my fear. "Yeah, I have a change of plans. I need to leave early." His face darkened just slightly, but then he nodded. "Ah, I see. Well, I hope you had a good stay." I muttered a quick goodbye and practically ran out the door. The second I got into a cab, my hands stopped shaking just enough for me to pull up the Airbnb app and report him. That's when I made a chilling discovery. Several other women had left reviews describing the exact same experience. Marco trying to enter their rooms at night, his overbearing presence, the way he made them feel unsafe. Airbnb had ignored the warnings. It wasn't until my report went viral that Airbnb finally banned him from hosting. But to this day, I wonder how many women he did this to before someone took action. And worse, what would have happened if I hadn't woken up that night? I've stayed in dozens of Airbnbs since then, but I never sleep without a doorstop and a chair against the door. I had been planning my trip to Los Angeles for weeks. It wasn't my first time in the city, but this visit was different. I wanted a break, some time away from work, from responsibilities, from the routine that was slowly draining me. I needed a fresh start, even if only for a few days. I had found what I thought was the perfect Airbnb, a modern loft in a great location for an unbelievably low price. The photos were stunning. Sleek wooden floors, a spacious open-concept kitchen, huge windows overlooking the city skyline. It had all the hallmarks of a dream stay. The host, someone named David, had decent reviews. Most guests praised the apartment's design and location, though a few mentioned something vague about a strange vibe. But at the time, I didn't think much of it. After all, what place doesn't have a few odd reviews? So I booked it. My flight landed in LA in the evening. The sky had begun turning deep orange as I made my way out of the airport, feeling the warm breeze on my face. I was tired, but the excitement of being in a new place kept me alert. David had messaged me earlier, saying he'd be there to meet me in person. "I like to welcome my guests myself," he had written. I found it a bit strange. Most Airbnb hosts just leave a key in a lockbox, but I wasn't in the mood to overanalyze. After all, maybe he was just the friendly type. I took an Uber to the address he had provided. The neighborhood wasn't quite what I expected. Instead of a bustling city district, I found myself in a quiet, almost desolate area. The street was lined with old apartment buildings, a few with boarded-up windows. Some streetlights flickered weakly, felt too isolated. Still, I brushed off the unease creeping into my mind. Maybe I was just tired from the flight. Then I saw him, a man in his mid-40s standing outside the building, smiling. Too wide. "Hey, you must be Spooks," he called out, stepping forward. I smiled back, trying to match his enthusiasm, but something about him felt off. His clothes were neat but slightly disheveled, like he had been in them for too long. His eyes lingered on me a little too long, scanning me in a way that made my stomach turn. "You found the place okay?" he asked. "Yeah. The Uber dropped me right outside," I said. He nodded, then gestured toward the door. "Come on in. I'll show you around." I followed him inside. The building had a stale smell, like old wood and damp carpet. The hallway was dimly lit, and the elevator didn't work. David laughed it off, saying, "Old buildings, right?" as we climbed the stairs. By the time we reached the third floor, my chest was tight, and the unease in my gut had doubled. Then he opened the door to the apartment. At first glance, the inside looked like the pictures, modern, stylish, spacious. But something was off. Felt staged. There was a pristine coffee table with no coasters. A couch that looked like no one had ever sat on it. The kitchen had an empty fruit bowl, positioned like a model home setup. But the worst part? There were no personal items. No books. No small decorations. No signs that anyone actually lived here. I set my bag down, glancing toward the windows. No view of the skyline like in the listing photos. Instead, the glass was foggy, and the street below was empty. Then the windows caught my attention. The edges looked off. I stepped closer. They were nailed shut. I frowned, reaching out to touch one. The wood around the nails looked freshly chipped, as if someone had forced them in recently. Something wrong. David's voice made me jump. I turned around quickly, forcing a smile. No, just checking out the view. He nodded, watching me. Too closely. You must be tired. Long flight? He asked, stepping into the kitchen. Yeah, I said, my voice feeling oddly distant. I'll get you something to drink, he offered. I hesitated. Oh, I'm good. Just need to get settled in. David paused for a second. Then he smiled again. That same too-wide smile. After a few minutes of small talk, David left, saying he had errands to run. I waited until I heard the door close behind him before exhaling. Something about this place was making my skin crawl. I checked my phone, barely any signal. The Wi-Fi password was written on a small piece of paper by the TV. I connected, but it was weirdly slow, making it hard to load anything beyond basic text. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling and decided to shower. Maybe I was just exhausted. I walked to the bathroom, closed the door, and turned the lock. The moment I did, I heard something metallic click from outside the bathroom. My heart froze. I turned the knob to test it. Locked. From the outside. A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't locked it. I yanked the door hard, and after a few tries, it finally gave way. I stepped back into the living room, my breath uneven. I walked to the front door. Out of pure instinct, I turned the knob. It didn't budge. I tried again. It was locked. From the outside, my entire body went cold. I pressed my ear against the door, listening. The hallway was silent. Too silent. I took a deep breath and grabbed my phone. I pulled up Uber, trying to book a ride. Error loading page. The Wi-Fi was barely working. I started to panic. Then, out of desperation, I pulled out my phone and pretended to make a call. Hey, yeah, I just got here, I said loudly, walking toward the door as if someone were on the other end. Yeah, I'll meet you downstairs. Give me 5 minutes. A second later, I heard movement outside the door. My breath caught in my throat. Then the lock clicked open. The door swung slightly. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my bag and bolted. As I reached the stairwell, I didn't dare look back. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd pass out. I reached the street and ran until I found an open gas station. Once inside, I called a friend in the city. I was shaking so hard I could barely talk. Later, I did some research. The Airbnb listing? It didn't exist anymore. The photos? Stolen from another property. I called the police, and when they investigated, David was already gone. But what they found inside the apartment still haunts me. Chains, hidden cameras, bags of unknown drugs. Had I stayed the night, I might not have made it out. To this day, I don't know what his true intentions were. I don't want to, but I know one thing for sure. I will never book an Airbnb the same way again.